the desire to be outwardly Jewish. Jewish pride on display. I don't know why. I think it's maybe because people aren't satisfied with being Christian. They want to be Jewish to be different and distinguish themselves from Christianity as maybe supposedly to be better than Christians. Or maybe it's a thought that Christians can be both Jewish and Christian, and that makes them even better than the Christians. I don't know. But there are these trends among Christianity, especially among the Sabbath keepers, to become outwardly Jewish and make a big display of it. So we're going to investigate that and see if that's a scriptural thing to do. In Romans 1, Paul writes to the Church of Rome in verse 28, "For he is not a Jew, which is one outwardly." How can that become more explicit? The people who want to become outwardly Jew do it because they want to draw attention to themselves. They want to feel special. And here the Apostle Paul writes to the Church of Rome that a real Jew, it's not one outwardly. You can see he faced the same problem back then that we face today in Christianity. And then he goes on to say, "Neither is that circumcision which is outward in the flesh, but he is a Jew which is one inwardly. And circumcision is that of the heart in the spirit, not in the letter." So now you know when he uses the term, not in the letter, he means not physically, not literally doing it. Whose praise is not of men, but of God. So what happens to the people who love the praise of men? They love to hear people talk about how holy they are and how wonderful they are if they're outwardly Jewish. If they outwardly keep the Sabbath, then they get the praise of men. And what happens is the Sabbath keepers all stand around and talk about how holy they are. But they don't get any praise from God by doing that. There's no praise from God. They're all worried about the praise of men, looking holy and trying to keep the Sabbath, and they run out and they preach Sabbath keeping so that they can also appear holy by doing that. And their attitude about all of that is, we are so special because we are Sabbath keepers. Ellen G. White wrote that Sabbath keeping was the seal of God. If you could just be Jewish enough to keep the Sabbath, you could have the seal of God. That's not the seal of God. The seal of God is not in the letter, keeping the Sabbath in the letter. And it's not trying to get the praise of men. It's not trying to be Jewish outwardly. In 2 Corinthians 3, verse 1, The Apostle Paul writes, do we begin again to commend ourselves, or do we need, or need we, as some others, epistles of commendation to you, or letters of commendation from you? You are our epistle, written in our hearts, known and read among all men. So the Spirit of God, the true Christianity, is when the Spirit of God works in you and everybody sees it. They don't need to see Sabbath keeping. They need to see the Spirit of God working in you. For as much as you are manifestly declared to be the epistle of Christ, a letter, the gospel, the epistle of Christ, ministered by us, written not with ink, but with the Spirit of the living God, not in tables of stone. All this stuff about the finger of God writing in the tables of stone is nothing more than an emphasis to try to get you to keep the Sabbath. Not in tables of stone. That's one of the things the Adventists never stop talking about, is the tables of stone. But God doesn't want you to pay attention to the tables of stone, but in fleshly tables of your heart. And such trust have we through Christ to Godward, not that we are sufficient in ourselves or think of anything as ourselves, but our sufficiency is of God. It's not an emphasis on tables of stone in our flesh. Paul is fighting the same problem in Corinthians. He fought it in Galatians. He fought it in Romans. He fights it in 1 Timothy, 2 Timothy, Titus, every one of his epistles. But our sufficiency is of God, you don't find sufficiency and praise of men, which is what all this Sabbath keeping is about. All this Jewish stuff is about. Who has made us able ministers of the New Testament, not of the letter. It's not of the letter. Why? But of the Spirit, because the letter kills. You sin and you die. You write the letters in tablets of stones, and you sin and you die. The letter killeth. But the Sabbath keepers are all about the letter. It's not because they're truly righteous. It's because they want to draw attention to themselves. But the Spirit gives life. The Spirit gives life, not the tables of stone, not being a Jew outwardly, not in the letter. The letter killeth. And we see this repeatedly from the Apostle Paul and from the other apostles. In Titus 1:10, Paul says there are many unruly and vain talkers, deceivers, especially they of the circumcision. The circumcision are the Sabbath keepers. The uncircumcision are not the Sabbath keepers. In the Old Testament, in order for you to become under the law, you had to be circumcised, and then you were obligated to keep the Sabbath by taking an oath to obey the laws of Israel, of the children of Israel. They are unruly. Oh, does that describe it? Vain talkers. Does that describe them? Deceivers. Now, if you want to be one of these, go right ahead. Here's Paul's description of you. Whose mouths must be stopped, who subvert whole houses, teaching things which they ought not, for filthy lucre's sake, for money. Doug Batchelor, Adventist Church. Do they subvert whole houses? Oh, they do their absolute best to subvert whole houses. They don't want you to become Christian. They want you to become Jewish. The problem for the Adventists is simply this. They insist on serving in the oldness of the letter, not in the newness of the Spirit. The oldness of the letter of the law, not in the newness of the Spirit. 2 Corinthians 3:6, who has made us able ministers of the New Testament, not in the letter, but of the Spirit. The Spirit kills, the letter kills, and the Spirit gives life. Romans 2:29, but he that is a Jew which is one inwardly, circumcision is of the heart, in the Spirit, and not in the letter, whose praise is not of men, but of God. He's getting to the heart of the issue. Romans 7:6, but now we are delivered from the law. He never talks about the law meaning only the 10 Commandments. He means the entire law. That being dead, wherein we were held, and that they want to go back to being dead and be held again. But there's not going to be, Jesus Christ is not going to come and deliver them again, because they've done despite to the Spirit of grace, and there's nothing left to save them. That we should serve in the newness of the Spirit, not in the oldness of the letter. Not in the oldness of the letter. That's all they talk about, is the oldness of the letter. The tables of stone, written with the finger of God. How many times do you have to hear that? The Epistle of Romans to the Church of Rome does not teach Sabbath keeping or any other of the doctrines of the Adventist Church. The whole purpose of the Adventist movement is to bring Christianity into the darkness and bondage of sin under the law, as before they were redeemed. What shall save them again? Christ is not going to come and die again for them. They've stomped on the blood of Jesus Christ and trampled it underfoot. As Hebrews 10 says, they want you to learn 40 ways to say Jesus or God in Hebrew and Aramaic. It's all so they can be so special and so holy. They're not satisfied being Christians. The persecution of the church is on every page of the New Testament. Yet there is an incessant people who insist on trying to show Jewish pride. Let me tell you, every one of them thought they were keeping the commandments of God while they were persecuting and murdering Christ and the apostles. The high priests, the people who cried out, "Crucify him, crucify him," they all could have bet they were keeping the commandments of God. They were all outwardly Jewish. When Pilate, a Gentile, tried to release Christ, they preferred a murderer be free than Christ would be free. Jesus Christ standing right in front of him. 2 Corinthians 11. Seeing that many glory after the flesh, that's Sabbath keeping, circumcision, trying to use Hebrew names and Aramaic names to appear holy. I will also glory, says the apostle. For you suffer fools gladly, seeing that you think of yourselves as being wise. That's exactly what the Adventist Church does. They suffer fools gladly. For you suffer if a man bring you into bondage under sin and the law again, under the tablets of stone, oh yes, written with the finger of God as a witness against you. If a man devour you, if a man take of you, he takes from your what you earn, and he takes it and he uses it for himself to preach, get a bigger following. If a man exalt himself, if a man smite you in the face, you let this guy slap you right in the face and you take it from him. So you could be Jewish. So you could appear Jewish on the outside. And let me tell you how I know the Apostle Paul's talking about Sabbath keepers. I speak as concerning reproach, as those who have been weak. We have been weak. Howbeit, insoever if any man is bold, I speak foolishly, I am bold also. Are they Hebrews? Are they Jewish? Do they speak Christ in the Hebrew name, in God in the Hebrew name? Do they spell it any other way but in the English so they can appear holy? Just because they want to show that they are Hebrews. They are Hebrews, the Apostle Paul said. So am I. Are they Israelites? So am I. Are they the seed of Abraham? So am I. Are they ministers of Christ? Obviously not. He says, I speak as a fool. I am more, in labors more abundant, in stripes above measure, in prisons more frequent, in deaths often. Guess who? He was in labors and abundant, in stripes above measure, and in prison more often, frequent, and in death often. Of the Jews, 5 times I received 40 stripes save one. Of the Sabbath keepers who were outwardly Jewish, I beg you people to become Christians and not Jews. Thrice I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. Thrice I was shipwrecked. A day and night have I been in the deep. All these things he suffered for Christ, not to make people Jewish. In Philippians 3 verse 1, the Apostle Paul writes, "Finally, my brethren, rejoice in the Lord. To write to you the same things to you. To me, indeed, it is not grievous. For you it is safe. Beware of dogs." That's what he calls the Judaizers. Beware of evil workers. They try to appear like they are holy, like they are doing God a service, but they're evil workers because they're corrupting the gospel. Beware of the concision. Concision means to mutilate. And he uses that because he's talking about the Judaizers mutilated the gospel. For we Christians are the circumcision, which worship God in spirit and rejoice in Jesus Christ and have no confidence in the flesh. All the Sabbath keeping stuff is nothing more than confidence in the flesh. Though I might have confidence in the flesh, if any man thinks that he hath wrought whereof I might trust in the flesh, I more. You think he's not talking about the Judaizers and the Sabbath keepers? He says, I was circumcised on the 8th day. I'm the stock of Israel, of the tribe of Benjamin, a Hebrew of Hebrews, as touching the law, a Pharisee, concerning zeal, persecuting the church, touching the righteousness which is of the law, blameless. But what things were gained to me, those I counted loss for Christ. Yea, doubtless, I count all things but loss for the excellency of the knowledge of Jesus Christ, my Lord, for whom I suffered the loss of all things, and do count them but dung, that I may win Christ. He counted all that righteousness of the law dung. And he wants to be found in him, verse 9, not having my own righteousness which is of the law, but that which is through the faith of Christ, the righteousness of God, which is of God by faith. Many of the Adventists don't even know about the righteousness of God, which is by faith. They've never heard of it. And if they do, they only use it to sell Sabbath keeping. That I may know him, the power of his resurrection, the fellowship of his sufferings. By whom? By the Sabbath keepers. Being made conformable unto his death. And indeed he was. If that by any means I may attain to the resurrection of the dead. Not to the appearance of being outwardly Jewish. If you enjoy these videos, please hit the subscribe button. Also, here's links to my page. You'll find that I have many videos on the immortality of the soul, refuting the Adventist conditional immortality, the doctrine of eternal punishment, beautifully explained in depth. One faith, one hope, one body, one church. How Christ's name was named Peter Cephas. That's what Christ called him, and not Peter. why Christians worship on Sunday, probably even the most in-depth study of Sunday worship in the Old and New Testament that you'll ever find. The Sabbath in the Old and New Testament, and the great controversy between Christ and the Sabbath keepers, not between Christ and his church, as Ellen G. White taught. There's a whole lot more. So please click the subscribe channel and feel free to leave any reasonable comments. And God bless all of you as we study together.